The Craigslist listing, Extreme Appalachian Survival, 3 days in the Ancient Dark, $150 per person, gear not included. I know these ridges like the back of my hand. Don't be a tourist, be a survivor. That was the ad. Looking back, the price tag alone was a warning sign. $150 for a 3 day guided backcountry expedition through some of the oldest, most isolated terrain in North America. But when you're looking for a quick, budget friendly weekend away from the city, a cheap Craigslist ad looks less like a red flag and more like a steal. There were 7 of us in total, a patchwork group of strangers who met up in the gravel parking lot of a shuttered gas station at the edge of the Chattahoochee-Oconee National Forest. First, there was the family of 4, the parents, a senior couple who had immigrated from South Korea and didn't speak a single word of English, and their 2 adult children, Jin and Minji, who were in their late 20s and acted as translators. They had booked the trip hoping for a rugged family bonding experience. Then there was a couple visiting from out of town, Marcus and Chloe, who looked like they had walked straight out of an outdoor gear catalog, brand new packs, pristine hiking boots, and trekking poles that still had the price tags on them. Finally, there was me, a single guy in my mid-30s, just looking to unplug from my corporate job for a few days. And then there was our guide. He pulled up 45 minutes late in a rusted, mud-splattered 2004 Jeep Cherokee that smelled loudly of burning oil. He climbed out, wearing a faded camo jacket, basketball shorts, and a pair of worn-out tactical boots that looked 2 sizes too big. He introduced himself as Blaze. And he wouldn't give us a real name. He couldn't have been older than 24, with a patchy beard, bloodshot eyes, and an aggressive, fast-talking energy that immediately made everyone uneasy. "All right, people, listen up," Blaze announced, slamming his Jeep door, which didn't close all the way. He didn't carry a backpack. Instead, he had an old military surplus duffel bag slung over one shoulder and a massive, unyielding Bowie knife strapped to his thigh. "The trails are for cowards. We're going deep backcountry, ridges that aren't even on the USGS maps. If you can't keep up, speak now, because once we cross the tree line, the mountains don't care about your feelings." Jin raised his hand, translating for his father, who was looking at Blaze's complete lack of actual gear with profound suspicion. "My dad wants to know if you have the topographical charts for the route, and what's our emergency check-in protocol? Our satellite messenger isn't picking up a signal down here." Blaze laughed, a short, mocking bark. "Charts? Man, I've got the map right up here," he said, tapping his temple. "Satellite messengers are for people who intend on getting lost. Trust the process. I do this every weekend." I leaned over to Marcus and whispered, "I give it 6 hours before he accidentally stabs himself with that knife. We should have walked away right then. We should have got back in our cars and gone home." But the sun was shining, the mountain air was crisp, and we had all driven hours to get there. We shouldered our packs, ignored the sinking feeling in our chests, and followed Blaze as he marched straight off the gravel road and into the dense, suffocating green of the Appalachian wilderness. Day 1. Off the grid. The first 4 hours were an exhausting, brutal reminder of why paths exist. Blaze didn't follow switchbacks. He marched us straight up steep, rocky inclines, tearing through thickets of mountain laurel and rhododendron that clawed at our clothes and scratched our faces. Whenever Marcus or Chloe asked for a break to drink water, Blaze would scoff, barely pausing his stride. "Water breaks are mental," he'd shout back over his shoulder. "Keep your momentum. If you stop, the lactic acid wins." The elderly parents struggled significantly. The father walked with a stubborn, quiet pride, but his knees were clearly giving out on the steep descents. Minji had to constantly call out to Blaze to slow down, but the guide barely acknowledged her, pushing forward with an irritating, frantic pace. By mid-afternoon, the pleasant, sunlit woods had shifted. The canopy grew so thick that the sunlight only made it through in sickly, fractured beams. The Appalachian Mountains are old, not jagged and sharp like the Rockies, but heavily weathered, massive, and suffocatingly dense. The ridges look identical, rolling waves of green and gray that stretch out forever. Around 4 o'clock p.m., I finally stopped in a small clearing, consulting a small magnetic compass I kept in my pocket. "Blaze," I called out, my voice firm. "We've been heading northeast for the last 2 hours, but you said the valley campsite was southwest of the ridge. We're walking parallel to the highway. but deep into the dead zone. Blaze spun around, his face flushing a bright, angry red. He adjusted his heavy duffel bag, looking visibly sweaty and winded, despite his alpha male bravado. "Are you the guide man? Did you post the listing?" "No. I'm navigating by the sun and the moss on the trees. We're cutting across a blind valley to loop back around. It's a shortcut. If you want to follow a map, go walk around a mall." Jin turned to his parents, speaking softly in Korean, trying to soothe the obvious anxiety radiating from his mother, who was clutching a wooden rosary in her pocket. "It's getting late," Marcus said, wiping sweat from his forehead, "and the weather report said it was supposed to drop into the low 40s tonight. We should set up camp while we still have daylight." Blaze checked his wrist, only to realize he wasn't wearing a watch. He cleared his throat, trying to regain his composure. "Yeah, obviously. I was just testing your endurance. We'll camp right down there in that hollow." The hollow was a dark, damp depression between two steep ridges. It felt entirely claustrophobic. The ground was covered in a thick layer of rotting leaves that squelched under our boots, and the air carried a faint, unpleasant smell, like wet dog mixed with old copper. As we pitched our tents, the forest went completely silent. If you've ever spent time in the woods, you know that a healthy forest is never truly quiet. There are always crickets, the rustle of small rodents, the distant call of a screech owl, or the wind moving through the leaves. But here, the silence was heavy, almost deliberate. It felt like the woods were holding their breath. By 8 p.m., we gathered around a meager fire that Blaze had struggled to light, mostly using pages torn from a pocket survival guide he had tried to hide in his duffel bag. He sat closest to the flames, monopolizing the warmth, boasting about his previous survival runs in Alaska and the Amazon. "Yeah, I once spent a week eating nothing but pine needles and grubs," Blaze bragged, chewing on a piece of beef jerky. "Most people don't have the mental toughness for the raw wild. They panic. But the wild recognizes me. It respects me." Just as he finished the sentence, a sound echoed from the ridge above us. It was a long, crackling snap, a heavy tree branch breaking. Not the light step of a deer or a raccoon, but something with significant weight. We all froze. The elderly mother gasped, pulling closer to Minji. Marcus clutched Chloe's arm. "What was that?" Jin asked, staring blindly into the pitch-black darkness beyond the firelight. Blaze shrugged, though his eyes darted nervously toward the tree line. "Just a black bear. They're scavengers. Keep your food locked up. I'll handle it if it comes close." He patted the handle of his Bowie knife, but his hand was shaking just enough to make the metal guard clink against the leather sheath. We turned in for the night shortly after. I had my own small one-man tent. As I lay in my sleeping bag, the silence returned, thicker than before. Around 2 a.m. I woke up. The fire had died down to a dull, glowing bed of embers. The air inside the tent was freezing. I was about to turn over and try to go back to sleep when I heard it. A voice. It was faint, muffled by the distance and the dense trees, coming from the ridge above our camp. "Help! Over here!" I dropped my light. It sounded exactly like Jin. The pitch, the inflection, the slight northern accent. It was identical. I sat up, my heart hammering against my ribs. I unzipped my tent door just an inch and looked out. Before I could call out, the voice came again, closer this time. "Help! Over here!" I dropped my light. But as I listened closely, a chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the mountain air. The words were right, the tone was right, but the delivery was wrong. It was rhythmic, too rhythmic. It sounded like a recording being played back on a loop, with the exact same pause between here and I each time. Suddenly, the large family tent unzipped. Minji stepped out into the frost. "Jin?" she called out into the dark. "Jin, is that you? Why are you up there?" A second later, Jin's actual voice spoke from inside the tent, hushed and terrified. "Minji, get back inside right now. I'm right here. I haven't left the tent." The moment Jin spoke from the tent, the voice on the ridge changed. It didn't stop. It evolved. The voice up on the hill attempted to repeat Jin's new words, but it glitched. It blended Jin's voice with Minji's voice, morphing into a bizarre, dual-toned, guttural screech that sounded like two people speaking in unison through a broken speaker. Minji, Jin, right here, over here, help. Then the sound of something massive moving through the brush began. It wasn't running on two legs, nor was it walking like a bear. It was a rapid, heavy, uneven thudding sound, like a creature with too many joints scrambling over the rocks at an impossible speed, moving away from our camp and up over the crest of the ridge. Nobody slept for the rest of the night. Inside the family tent, I could hear the elderly mother weeping, softly praying in a language the surrounding woods had likely never heard before. Day 2. The Loop. When the sun finally rose, casting a gray, foggy light over the hollow, the mood in the group was entirely fractured. Chloe was crying silently while Marcus tried to comfort her, his own face pale and exhausted. Jin and Minji were huddled around their parents. The father looked stoic but terrified, his eyes fixed on the tree line. Blaze was sitting by the cold ashes of the fire, frantically trying to look like he was in control. He was checking his boots, adjusting his knife, avoiding everyone's gaze. "We're going back," Jin said, stepping toward him, speaking for his entire family. "We are turning around and walking back to the cars right now. My parents cannot do this, and whatever is out there isn't safe." That was just an echo," Blaze said, his voice cracking slightly before he forced his arrogant sneer back onto his face. "A mountain lion or something. They can mimic sounds. It's a known biological fact. You guys are city folks. You get spooked by a loud bird. We're not turning back." The loop continues forward. "We don't care about your loop, Blaze," Marcus shouted, stepping forward. "That wasn't an echo, and that wasn't a mountain lion. We're done. Show us the way back to the road." Blaze stood up, drawing himself to his full height, trying to look intimidating. "Listen to me, you little tech-dependent softies. You don't know where you are. If you leave this group, you'll die out here in 48 hours. I am the only one who knows the exit vectors. We go forward, we hit the logging trail, and we're back by tonight. End of discussion." Without waiting for a response, he grabbed his duffel bag and began hiking up the opposite ridge. We looked at each other. I checked my compass again. "The highway should be south," I muttered to Marcus and Jin. "He's taking us northwest, deeper into the ridge system. But if we separate without a map, we're entirely blind. We have to keep his eyes on us, but force him toward the road the second we see a landmark." The second day was a waking nightmare. The fog never truly lifted. It just hung in the trees like a wet gray shroud. The forest felt increasingly hostile. The trees were deformed here, stunted, twisted oaks and pines that looked like they had been broken and regrown in agonizing shapes. And then there was the smell. The copper and rot stench from the night before followed us. It didn't matter if we walked upwind or downwind, the air carried a heavy, musky odor of decay that seemed to cling to the back of our throats. By noon, we realized we were being hunted. It didn't hide itself well, or perhaps it just didn't care to. Every 20 minutes we would hear a sound from the thick brush parallel to our path, the snap of a branch, the heavy, wet thud of something stepping on the mud. But it was the speed that defied logic. We would hear a rustle 30 yards to our left, and a fraction of a second later, the exact same sound would echo from a cliff face 40 feet above us to our right. Nothing human, nothing animal known to science could move through dense Appalachian terrain that quickly without making a sound. "Hey, look at that," Marcus said suddenly, pointing to a massive, lightning-struck pine tree up ahead. The trunk was split down the middle, charred black. I stopped dead in my tracks. My face went entirely white. I reached down and pointed at the mud near her feet. There was a footprint. A fresh boot print with a distinct cross-hatched tread pattern. Next to it was a wrapper from a brand of beef jerky, the exact brand Blaze had been eating the night before. "We're walking in circles," I whispered, my voice trembling. "We've been walking for 5 hours, and we're right back to where we started this morning." We all turned to look at Blaze, the arrogant facade completely cracked. He dropped his military duffel bag into the mud. His chest was heaving, his eyes wide and frantic, darting around the foggy woods. He looked like a child who had realized he was entirely out of his depth. I don't understand," Blaze stammered, his voice losing all of its gravelly bravado. "The landmarks, they're changing. The ridge wasn't this high this morning. The valley wasn't here. The trees are moving." "You don't know where we are," Marcus said, his voice dangerously low. He stepped toward Blaze, his fists clenched. "You lied to us. You took us out here to get us lost." "I've hiked here before," Blaze yelled, his voice rising in panic. "I swear I have. But it's not right today. The mountain, it's not letting us leave. Everyone shut up, Jin hissed, holding his hands out to shield his elderly parents. Listen! And the forest had gone silent again. The fog seemed to press in closer, reducing our visibility to barely 15 feet in any direction. From the fog, just beyond the charred pine tree, we heard the sound of footsteps. Thud, thud, thud. They were heavy, dragging steps. And then a voice called out. It was the elderly father's voice, but he wasn't speaking Korean. He spoke in a flat, monotone, heavily accented English, reciting words he couldn't possibly know. Water breaks are mental. Keep your momentum. The wild recognizes me. The elderly father himself let out a terrified, guttural cry, stumbling backward into his son's arms. His wife fell to her knees, frantically repeating her prayers aloud, her hands trembling over her rosary beads. The entity in the fog realized the psychological trick had hit its mark. The footsteps stopped. Then came a sound that made our blood run cold. It was a wet, sickening pop, followed by the sound of bones sliding and rearranging themselves. It sounded like someone snapping a handful of dry celery stalks inside a wet leather bag. Whatever was out there was changing its shape, adjusting its anatomy to better suit the terrain. A high-pitched, mocking laugh bubbled out of the fog, a sound that was a horrific combination of a human infant crying and a dying coyote. It scrambled away, the heavy, multi-jointed thudding sound tearing through the brush, circling us at a terrifying speed. "Run!" Blaze screamed, completely losing his mind. He didn't grab his duffel bag. He didn't look back at us. He drew his massive Bowie knife and sprinted blindly into the fog, heading down the steep, rocky slope into the darkness of the next hollow. "Blaze, stop! Stay together!" I yelled, but it was too late. His heavy footsteps faded into the distance, followed quickly by the rapid, unnatural thudding of the thing chasing after him. We didn't follow him. We moved as a single, terrified pack, retreating back toward the lightning-struck pine, backing ourselves into a small rock outcrop that offered at least some protection from the rear. We pulled out our small pocket knives, our flashlights, and our trekking poles, holding them out like primitive weapons against the gathering dark. Jin and I stood on the outer edge, keeping the elderly parents and the girls in the center. Night 2. The screams. We didn't build a fire that night. We knew that light would only draw its eyes. We huddled together under the rock overhang. The 7 of us pressed so close we could feel each other's hearts racing. The temperature plummeted, and our breath plumed in the air, white ghosts in the darkness. Around midnight, the rain started. It was a cold, miserable drizzle that clicked against the leaves and muffled the sounds of the forest. But it didn't muffle the screams. They started about a mile away, down in the deep hollow where Blaze had run. It was Blaze's voice, unmistakable and filled with a pure, unadulterated terror that I hope I never have to hear again. "Get away from me! No, that's not real! You're not real!" We covered our ears, but the sound cut through the forest like a knife. We heard him sprint through the underbrush, the wet thud of his boots sliding on the mud. Then we heard the sound of metal hitting rock. He had dropped his knife. Then the screams changed. Blaze's voice began to warp. He would scream in his own voice, and then mid-breath, the scream would shift into Chloe's voice, then into Jin's voice, and then into a horrible, flat, mechanical drone. It was practicing. It was harvesting his vocal cords, learning the exact frequencies of his agony. "Please, help me, Marcus, Jin, it's right behind..." The scream was abruptly cut off by a wet, heavy crunching sound. The sound of something dense and heavy crushing through a hollow shell. Then silence. For 2 hours, nothing happened. The rain continued to fall. The elderly mother prayed silently in the dark, her husband holding her hand tightly, his face set in a grim, rigid mask of survival. We knew that our guide was gone, and that we were entirely alone in a mountain range that felt like it had been removed from the map of the known world. Around 3:30 a.m., the footsteps returned to our camp. They came from the direction of the slope. They were slow, heavy, and deliberate. Thud, thud, thud. A figure stepped out of the fog, illuminated only by the faint, ambient gray light of the rainy night. It was wearing a faded camo jacket and basketball shorts. It looked like Blaze, but it wasn't Blaze. The proportions were entirely wrong. The torso was elongated, stretched out like taffy, making the camo jacket look like a tight crop top. The arms hung down past its knees, the fingers dragging in the wet leaves. It walked with a bizarre, jerky motion, its knees bending backward like a bird's with every step it took. Its head was tilted at a sharp, unnatural 90-degree angle, resting flat against its left shoulder. It stopped 10 feet from our rock overhang. It didn't have a face anymore. Where Blaze's features should have been, the skin was stretched tight and smooth, like a layer of pale wax over a skull, with only two dark hollow pits where the eyes belonged. It stood there, swaying slightly from side to side in the rain. Then its chest expanded, a massive, unnatural inhalation that stretched the fabric of the camo jacket to its breaking point. It opened its featureless head, a jagged tear ripping open across the bottom of its jawline. When it spoke, it didn't use Blaze's voice. It used mine. Blaze, we've been heading northeast for the last 2 hours. We're walking deep into the dead zone. It repeated the exact words I had said to Blaze the afternoon before, using my precise cadence, my exact tone, even capturing the slight breathlessness of my voice when I was frustrated. Marcus pressed himself back against the rock wall, a choked sob escaping Chloe's throat. I gripped my small pocket knife, my knuckles white, staring at the monstrosity that was wearing our guide's clothes. The entity stepped closer, its backward bending legs clicking like dry wood. It shifted its vocal cords again. This time it spoke in the elderly mother's voice, perfectly replicating a frantic, weeping Korean prayer, though the entity clearly didn't understand the words. It delivered them with a rhythmic, mocking cadence. Hearing his wife's sacred words butchered by the thing, the elderly father let out a primal, raging roar. He didn't speak English, but his fury was universal. He grabbed a heavy, jagged rock from the cave floor and lunged forward, hurling it with all his might. The rock struck the creature square in its elongated chest. The entity didn't scream. It didn't react to the pain the way a living thing would, but it reared back, its long arms thrashing wildly, striking a nearby birch tree and snapping the trunk completely in half with a single, effortless backhand. Jin quickly pulled out a heavy canister of bear spray he had kept in his side pocket, unleashing a massive cloud of pressurized orange pepper spray directly into the creature's hollow eye pits. The chemical cloud seemed to confuse it, obscuring its vision. It turned and scrambled back into the fog. Moving on all fours now, its long limbs bending and twisting over the boulders like a massive, hairless spider, disappearing into the dark gray mist. Day 3, the dead end. We didn't wait for dawn. The moment the entity retreated, Jin grabbed his father and Minji grabbed her mother. Now, I said, my voice fiercely authoritative. We run now. We don't look back. We don't stop for gear. We run south. We walk downhill. All rivers lead to a valley. All valleys lead to a road. We abandoned our tents, our sleeping bags, and everything that weighed us down. We kept only our flashlights and our remaining canisters of bear spray. The final morning was a blur of pure adrenaline-fueled survival. Jin and Marcus took turns supporting the elderly father, whose pride had finally given way to physical exhaustion, while Minji kept her mother moving at a frantic pace. We sprinted down the steep slopes, sliding through the slick mud, tumbling over rocks, and tearing our skin on the briars. The thing did not let us go easily. It pursued us from the ridges above. It didn't look like Blaze anymore. As the hours passed and we ran harder, we would catch glimpses of it through the fog, a massive, emaciated ash-gray form, nearly 9 feet tall, moving effortlessly through the high canopy, leaping from tree to tree like a starved ape. It kept calling out to us. It used our names. It used our mothers' voices. It used the sound of emergency sirens, the sound of a honking car horn, anything it had ever heard, anything it thought might make us turn around. Marcus, come back. I forgot my phone. Chloe's voice would shout from behind us, while the real Chloe was running right beside him, gasping for air. Minji, wait for me, the father's voice would call out in perfect Korean from the ridges above, while the real father was breathing heavily, being carried down the mountain by his son. We didn't look. We kept our eyes glued to the heels of the person in front of us. By noon, my lungs were burning, my legs felt like poured concrete, and my face was covered in a mask of dried sweat and blood from a branch that had slashed my cheek. Suddenly, Marcus, who was leading the pack, tripped and fell, tumbling down a steep, muddy embankment. We all slid down after him, crashing into a heap at the bottom. I pushed myself up, expecting to see a highway, an old logging trail, or even a river. Instead, my eyes hit an absolute dead end. We were at the base of a massive semicircular limestone cliff face that rose 200 feet straight into the foggy sky. The mountain had funneled us down into a blind box canyon. There was no highway, there was no road. My compass needle was spinning helplessly in small, erratic circles. The ancient terrain had entirely swallowed us. No, 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 Jin whispered, dropping his father onto the wet leaves. He ran his hands through his hair, looking up at the sheer stone walls. We went downhill. We followed the water. It's supposed to lead out. From the top of the limestone cliff, a figure slowly leaned over the edge. It was 9 feet tall, its ash-gray skin slick with the falling rain. But it wasn't alone anymore. Standing right beside it was a second figure. This one was shorter, wearing a torn, bloody camo jacket and basketball shorts. Its limbs were freshly elongated, its knees snapped backward, its head resting flat against its left shoulder. It was Blaze, or what was left of him, and next to Blaze, another form began to step out of the fog. It was wearing pristine hiking gear, a brand new Osprey pack. Its torso was stretched like taffy, its neck twisting unnaturally as its face melted into a smooth, waxy layer of pale skin. It was Marcus. I spun around in horror. Marcus had been at the front of our line. He had been the one leading us down the slope. I looked back at the group huddled in the mud. Marcus wasn't among us. Chloe was staring up at the cliff, her eyes wide, a silent, broken scream locked in her throat as she recognized her boyfriend's jacket on the monstrosity above. The thing had taken Marcus hours ago in the fog without any of us noticing, using his voice to guide us straight into the slaughterhouse. The three entities on the cliff face didn't descend using the rocks. They simply tipped forward, falling through the air, landing at the base of the canyon with a series of heavy, wet thuds. Their bones snapped and instantly rearranged upon impact, their long, multi-jointed limbs unfolding like spiders. The original entity stepped forward, its featureless head splitting open along the jawline. When it spoke, it used Marcus's voice, clear and loud, echoing off the stone walls. Chloe, honey, come here. I found the trail. It's right over here. Come into the trees. And then the second entity, the one wearing Blaze's clothes, opened its jagged maw. It used the elderly mother's voice, mimicking her terrified, weeping Korean prayers with a horrible, rhythmic mockery. The third entity, the one that had just been Marcus, opened its mouth. It used my voice. It spoke the words I am saying right now, predicting my final thoughts with absolute, terrifying precision. There is no exit. The mountains don't care about your feelings. Thanks for playing, guys. See you next weekend. Jin grabbed his sister and his parents, pulling them into a tight, final embrace as the three hairless, multi-jointed shapes began to scramble across the wet leaves toward us at an impossible speed. I dropped my useless pocket knife into the mud, pulled my phone from my pocket, and hit record on the voice memo app. I'm tossing the phone into a deep crevice under the limestone wall. If anyone ever finds this, don't follow the listing. There's no exit. The sound of snapping celery stalks is right behind me.